Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We are here today with a Preservation Book Club author talk with Joseph McGill and Herb Frazier to talk about their book, Sleeping with the Ancestors. My name is Katie Peace. I'm the Director of Communications for the Preservation League of New York State. If you've made your way to this webinar but are not yet familiar with the League, we are a New York statewide nonprofit focused on investing in people and projects that champion the essential role of preservation in community revitalization, sustainable economic growth, and the protection of our historic buildings and landscapes. So I want to say thank you to our sponsor, the Peggy Ann and Roger G. Gary Charitable Trust. They underwrite our Future of Preservation webinars and our Preservation Book Club events. So thank you to them. And so today we are going to be talking about Sleeping with the Ancestors, How I Followed the Footprints of Slavery, a book written by Slave Dwelling Project founder Joseph McGill Jr. and Herb Frazier. This is a personal account of one man's groundbreaking project to sleep overnight in the countless oft overlooked former slave dwellings that still stand across the country, fascinating history behind those sites, and how he has used the experience to shed light on larger issues of race in America. Following Joseph and Herb's presentation, they will be joined in conversation by Donnamarie Barnes, the Director of History and Heritage at Sylvester Manor Educational Farm. Donnamarie has been working at Sylvester Manor since 2014 when she started as a volunteer. She's been full-time there since 2016. In her current role, she researches the lives and identities of the enslaved, free people of color, and Indigenous people of Sylvester Manor and the East End of Long Island. She interprets their stories into the Manor's narrative, and she serves as a liaison between partner organizations and institutions of higher learning. In addition, she is involved in conserving and interpreting the various collections at Sylvester Manor. She is an accomplished photographer and curator, and she's also a lifelong resident of Nineveh Beach in Sag Harbor, which is how I first got to know her through our board member, Dr. Georgette Greer-Key. The League included Sag Harbor as a 7 to Save back in 2020, and so I'm excited that we've been able to stay connected since then. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Donnamarie to give us an introduction for today's talk.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you and welcome to everyone. Welcome to the Preservation Book Club. It's a great honor today to be a part of this conversation between Joe McGill and Herb Frazier and to talk about their new book, Sleeping with the Ancestors, How I Followed the Footprints of Slavery. Today, we are going to be discussing the book that Joe and Herb have co-authored and looking at the work of the Slave Dwelling Project. As I introduce them, before they do their presentation, I'd just like to say that Joseph McGill Jr. is the founder and executive of the Slave Dwelling Project and works as the History and Culture Coordinator for Magnolia Plantation and Garden in Charleston, South Carolina. Herb Frazier is the Special Projects Editor at the Charleston City Paper. He is a journalist who has worked for several daily newspapers, as well as the author and co-author of numerous publications. Thank you both to Joe and Herb for being with us today. Joe has, over the years of working on the Slave Dwelling Project, answered a call from the ancestors themselves, it feels. He has embarked on a unique and personal quest, and his work with the Slave Dwelling Project over the years began with an idea started in 1999 and has progressed, evolved, expanded, and matured into a life's work with national significance. Over the years, Joe has done sleepovers at dwellings that once housed enslaved African people from Charleston, South Carolina, to Alabama and Texas, to New York, and as far as Minnesota. It has been an incredible journey, and as he states in the book, he has since 2010, he has traveled to 25 states, including the District of Columbia, and spent 200 nights sleeping in dwellings where enslaved people lived. On a personal note, Joe and I first met in 2015 in an August day when he came to do a sleepover at Sylvester Manor, which is located on the East End of Long Island in New York. At the time, I was a volunteer and feeling a pull and a calling of my own to become involved in this work. And I have to say that meeting Joe and the occasion of his spending the night in the attic space of our 1737 manor house, where the enslaved and indentured people lived, was an inspiration and an eye-opener to all of us who were involved in the work at Sylvester Manor. It helped us to further our understanding and thinking of how to change and include in our narrative for tours and presentations the lives and the histories of the enslaved African people who had been part of Sylvester Manor since its beginning in 1651. For me personally, it added to the support that I was feeling of embarking on this new journey of work. I had never worked in history. I was not a historian. This was all very new to me. And starting with Joe's visit, it became a very real thing for me. As Katie mentioned, I quickly became part of the staff in 2016 and now serve as the Director of History and Heritage at Sylvester Manor. So Joe, I offer you a very personal thank you. Today's presentation, we are now going to have Joe and Herb talk a little bit about the slave dwelling project and the writing of their book, followed by a question and answer period and further conversation. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome and to present Joseph McGill Jr. and Herb Frazier. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Donnamarie. Yeah, I do believe my camera is on. I don't know if you can see me, but I do have my camera on.
Yes, we can see you, Joe. It's fine.
Okay, lovely. Yes, slave dwelling project came about as an idea here where I currently am. I'm currently on a plantation, Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, where I currently work full time. And it was here at Magnolia Plantation and Gardens that I got the idea to start the slave dwelling project, because I was part of a restoration project to restore the cabins here at Magnolia. And because I said out loud to the head of the project, restoring the cabins, that I wanted to spend the night in the cabins, they took it up the channels and got the okay for me to do it. And I thought if they said yes, maybe there are others who would say yes also to the idea that I had about sleeping in slave dwellings. And the idea was to sleep in the slave dwellings to bring much needed attention to the slave dwellings, because I would visit plantations like this and I would hear all about the nice, beautiful big house, the architecturally significant big house, the content of the big house, the awesomeness of the big house, but very seldom are at all would I hear about the enslaved people there, the people whose labor was stolen to make all that possible, are the people who physically built those spaces, the people who put those marks in those beams, are the people whose fingerprints are in some of those bricks that exist around these plantation houses. They were not talking about, in their term, they call them outbuildings or dependencies, words that are not as harsh or not as painful as slave cabins. They would not talk about those things. They would not talk about the people who were enslaved, or if they talked about those enslaved people, they made them happy. They made the people who enslaved them benevolent or nice people. That's not what I learned in school when I was being educated about South Carolina history or the U.S. history. They didn't tell me about the people who built those places. They didn't tell me about the 12 presidents who enslaved people, or the 25 signers of the Constitution who were enslavers, or the 41 signers of the Declaration of Independence who were enslavers. It is since I started this project, I've learned those things. My initial intent, of course, was to stay within the boundaries of the state of South Carolina, just sleeping in these places. I got the list from the Historic Preservation Office of the places that applied. I started making those phone calls to those places. Most of those places understood. They said, "Yes, come on, we'll do here what you want to do." There were a few no's along the way. Some of those no's have since been turned into yeses, and during the question and answer period, we might be able to address some of those. But now the slave dwelling project has evolved into a lot of things. We do more than just sleep in these cabins now. We have campfires, and we talk about those things that are relevant. We talk about the Confederacy. We talk about Confederate monuments. Should they stay or should they go? Historical trauma. Why is it that you don't see a lot of Black folks in the audiences at these on these plantations? We talk about white supremacy and white privilege. And of course, the elephant in the room now is about the elephant in the room now is about anti-CRT and anti-woke. So those are the things that we do now. So the slave dwelling project has been around. We plan to be around sometime. Now, as far as the book is concerned, um, very early on in the project, I ran this idea by Herb Frazier, the co-writer of the book. And his feedback was all positive. It was all good. In fact, he stated that if I were to uh, go on such a quest, uh, it would be well attended. And he was right. The places that I go, get a lot of positive, um, about the project and my intent. But Herb took this book idea to another level. Because Herb was well published. This is his fourth book. Um, Prior to me consulting with Herb to write the book, there were a few false starts. The University of Georgia, University of Virginia wanted me to go through their university presses and publish the book. But because Herb and I have had this relationship that we've had, former co-workers at Magnolia Plantation and Gardens here, um, when the when those false starts went away and Herb and I got down to business, and for the last maybe 2, 3 years, we put forth the effort to produce this book. And Sleeping with the Ancestors, How I Followed the Footprints of Slavery, is the result of our efforts.
Well, Joe, thank you. Thank you for that introduction and those kind words. And also, I'm always take this opportunity or any opportunity to thank you for the opportunity to tell your incredible story of traveling the country for the last 13 years and spending more than 200 nights in slave cabins in 25 states in the District of Columbia. I must say at the onset that Joe did the bulk of the work. I've only spent a few nights in cabins with him and other dwellings with him. And I think that my career as a journalist for 40 some years prepared me for this opportunity to help Joe tell his story because as a journalist, I've traveled to the Caribbean and West Africa and reported on our ancestors' contributions to the building of America in low country South Carolina in particular. So when those two failed attempts happened, I said, Joe, you need to tell this story, and I didn't want to just interject myself. I sort of waited. The time was right when we came together in around 2021, and we started putting this story together and doing the research for it. What helped was that when Joe was doing his work, he wrote blogs in the early years of his work. He wrote blogs, and some of the people who spent the night with him also wrote blogs. So we were able then to bring all those narratives together and do some additional research to start to build a proposal or outline that we presented to the publisher Hachette, who published Sleeping with the Ancestors, and the book was released this past June. One of the things that we really, really wanted to do with this book, in addition to tell Joe's experiences of traveling the country, we wanted to make sure that we brought forward the voices of the ancestors, to tell their stories and their experiences so that we could give them voice, because, as when they were enslaved, they were voiceless. But this is an opportunity to tell their stories. We also included some history on the places where Joe slept. We included histories or information about the people who were the enslavers at these sites, but also we brought in other aspects of slavery and use this collection to try to weave together a narrative that could take the reader to some of the early sites. And then I'll end with, as we were doing this work, we realized that we needed to put together, or we could put together, there was enough information to put together chapters that talk about America's slavery's role in helping form the nation's higher education system. Some of the parks, state-owned parks and federal-owned parks, were once on former plantation sites, and also 12 of the nation's presidents were slave owners, and 8 of them owned enslaved people while they served in the White House. So we tell Joe's stories of sleeping at the homes of U.S. presidents, at colleges and universities, and at state parks, federal and state-owned parks around the country. Joe?
Yes. So yeah, that's what we do, and it was fun. The book writing process was fun. We would meet weekly over some food and a bottle of Uncle Nearest, and we would get all the information that was required to make a book. The idea of sleeping in slave dwellings is a pretty good idea, if I must say so myself. But the idea alone is just not enough for a book. You gotta be compelling. You gotta have substance for a book, and that's where, of course, Herb Frazier came in. Of course, being 3 times published, now 4 times published. I knew his work. So we would get together, and he would ask me those probing questions about, well, do you remember this night back in 2010 or back in 2011? I said, Herb, no, I could barely remember what happened yesterday. But he was so persistent in that way. And as he said, lucky we had the blogs. I was writing the blogs. I came along kicking and screaming when the request for me to do blogs was presented to me by my friend Tanya Bowers, who was my former co-worker at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I told her I was not a writer like that. She said, just sleep in these places. You have to document it because it's for our future. We don't want to be in that same place where you were when you graduated from high school, with misconceptions of our enslaved ancestors and their agency. Let's document this thing as you go. She said, write 500 words. And initially it was a struggle for me to write 500 words. But as I did that first blog, and that second and third blog got easier and easier. Now, one of my friends very early on in the process of me writing blogs, Linda Davis, who I'll get to hang out with her this coming weekend in Prince George's County, she reminded me maybe about 3 blogs in that, she said, we've heard enough about you. Let's start talking about the people who were actually enslaved at these places where you lay your head. So I took her advice, and so those blogs from that point on were indeed about the people that inhabited those spaces and the history of the places themselves. And as Herb stated, it was enough to draw on to have some good substance for the book. And of course, what Herb brought to the table was his diligence in researching stuff. I tell Herb often, like I tell genealogists and archaeologists, I don't have their patience. I'm more of kind of a hands-on, in the trenches kind of guy. I'll parachute into a place, do what I need to do, and I'm out. That's kind of my style. So I need people like Herb Frazier to kind of, go into the detail, go into the weeds and pull out the necessary information and make these stories compelling.
Well, you also needed me to help you draw out of you one of the most persistent questions I guess I was asking you throughout this process was, how did this experience change you? You started out, as you know, with the mindset that you were going to stay in slave cabins in South Carolina, just one state, for 1 year. And for the purposes of just drawing attention to these structures, for the need to preserve these structures. And you had a certain viewpoint about it. You were somewhat conservative, I guess, in the early years. But as time went on, and as you were having more and more of these experiences and more of these sometimes fiery conversations around these, no pun intended, campfires, uh, your attitude about what you were doing changed, and it changed you personally. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, it made me more protective of the ancestors. It made me know that just as I was in a place um, where I was misled about their existence and their agency, um, that place that I was left that made me think that they were insignificant or they were deserving of their fate. Um, I've overcome that, and I overcame that very early on in the project, and I'm glad that that happened. Yeah, it was my intent just to sleep for 1 year in slave dwellings in the state of South Carolina and be done with it. It's going to be one and done. But then I started the project, and it, I learned very early on this project was a lot bigger than Joe McGill and his and my intentions. Um, these other forces, outside forces, started doing what they could do. The media uh, got on this thing. NPR and well, first it was the Charlotte Observer. Um, Mr. Eric Frazier spent the night with me in this cabin that's on the screen right now that you see. That's at Hobcob Barony. Eric Frazier spent the night with me in that particular cabin. And the result was a piece in the Charlotte Observer. And that was like the genie was out of the bottle. That bell could not be unrung. And then NPR did a piece on it. And when NPR did what they did, it was like everybody knew. I started getting, phone calls from some of these sites. The roles started to be reversed. In other words, I'm not only am I still calling these places, some of these places, they're now calling me. And coming near the end of the year of the first year, 2010, having the opportunity to go to the National Preservation Conference, which was in the state of Texas, and interacting with folks from all around the state that had properties that applied to the intentions of the slave dwelling project. I got these invitations from these other states, even northern states, because I was still in a place where slavery in northern states was not a thing for me. Was not a I did not occupy any space in my head. Um, so interacting with these people from these places in these northern states, made it necessary for me to do more research on what I was doing and see greater potential for what I was doing. And then I started, scheduling these places out of state, making these resources aware that, if you want me to do this, you're going to have to provide the resources for me to do it. Well, nobody hesitated because they saw the value in what I was doing, because not only was I satisfying my curiosity, scratching my itch, I was giving them the opportunity to bring attention to the fact that not only do the slave dwellings exist on their property, they're doing the right thing, or at least have the intention of doing the right thing with these slave dwellings.
Well, you mentioned that in the beginnings, you had to make the calls to arrange the sleepovers, and one of the people who called you early on was Larry Falconberry, the owner of Goodwill Plantation just outside of Columbia. And I see that somebody here gave a shout out to Midland, South Carolina, and Goodwill is in the Midlands, just in Lower Richland County near Columbia. Uh, and Goodwill has an interesting history because it was at Goodwill that where they grew rice, and the rice farmers at Goodwill were people who were removed from coastal South Carolina to Goodwill during the Civil War. Um, and that cabin where you slept was an interesting cabin that had a very interesting history because it connected you at the time, with one of the enslaved women at Goodwill.
Yeah, that person, Sarah Danewood. Hello, Sarah. I hope you're still connected. I hope you're still, one of the 39 that's checked in with us. Yeah, Mr. Larry Falconberry. He was the first one who called me. Kind of reversed the roles, and this was very early on. As a result of Herb Frazier's work, putting it out there and doing the marketing for us initially. I did get that call from Mr. Falconberry, and I went there and had my sleepover there on his site. The place is very interesting because Mr. Falconberry, who worked in forestry, he acquired the property to subdivide it, make it, develop it. And as he states, he he went, he bought the property sight unseen, and then he went and he actually saw the property. And when he saw the property and started doing the research on the property and learning about the slavery that existed there, the fact that they were growing rice there in the Midlands, because a lot of those enslavers, when the Civil War started, they did their best to get their enslaved people away from where they thought the action would be, as where the federal forces would be. They wanted to get their enslaved people as far from there as possible. And a lot of those enslavers shipped sent their enslaved people uh, to Goodwill Plantation or to the Midlands or inland. And because they did that, Goodwill Plantation was one of these places where a lot of these rice planters from the Low Country, the coastal South Carolina, went to that place, and they took that ingenuity with them. They turned that place on the Wateree River into a place that would grow rice.
And the interesting thing about the Wateree, just in adjacent Kershaw County, I'm sorry, Sumter County, we tell the story of William Ellison, a black man who owned a cotton plantation in Sumter County. And that was one of the surprises that we encountered in our research for this book.
Yeah. So yeah, we turned over a lot of a lot of interesting things, a lot of places that I went that I didn't think, back when I started the project, that existed. We went to a place, and this one is written about in the book, uh, in in North Carolina, the hills of North Carolina, Mars Hill University, where they were building the college, and the contractors wanted to be paid. Uh, the folks weren't paying them in a timely manner, and one of the contractors took as collateral one of the enslaved people of one of the trustees, and he was going to auction them off. I'll sell this person. Um, well, the trustees passed a hat and they came up with the money to pay the contractor. But that was very interesting to me that they could use a person as collateral, or threaten to sell a person, to get their money that was owed to them. There are also instances that I've come across where it got very contentious around the campfire. I said that the slave dwelling project has evolved into more than just a sleepover. We do these sleepovers now. We do these conversations around these campfires, and sometimes it has gotten contentious, and I had to physically get in between people to have them from swinging on each other, because I don't want the slave dwelling project to end in that manner. There's also the fact that we are now doing living history. Once upon a time, one could go to a historic site, and you still can today go to a historic site and see uh, various things being demonstrated that our enslaved ancestors would have been doing back then. But they're not black people doing it. Like blacksmithing and brick making and things of those nature, those things that our enslaved ancestors would have been doing. So now we've got a team of living historians that we travel with now. A lot of times I go to these places, I don't go alone. About 3 weekends ago, we were in Lexington, Kentucky at the Henry Clay site. And I took a team of living historians with me. We had a storyteller, we had a gentleman doing cooking demonstration, we had a gentleman doing brick making demonstration. So a lot of times we go to these places now and we do those things. I'm seeing on the screen there a family reunion. Family reunions now are a thing on plantations. And we're trying to convince others that, it's okay to have a family reunion on these plantations when you have done that research, when you know that your ancestors were enslaved at these plantations. And there are still some of us who are hesitant, don't want to interact with these spaces. But we're trying to convince folks that it's okay to interact with these spaces, because if we don't do that, then we'll get these folks out there, telling the stories that they want the public to consume. Telling those stories about, slavery being beneficial to the people who are enslaved. Well, we know better than that. The Slave Dwelling Project knows better than that. Herb Frazier knows better than that. And this book tells us that, this is the story that needs to be told. So that's what we do with our in this book.
Joe, if my count is right, I think this is the 18th uh, time that we've come together to talk about the book since it was released in June. And in each one of these talks that we've given so far, someone will ask this question: did you see a ghost? Did you feel the spirits? Did you have a spiritual experience sleeping in a slave cabin and or a urban dwelling where our ancestors resided and raised their families? And
Did I?
and I know your answer to that question, but you go ahead and give it.
Well, I don't know what a ghost looks like, smell like, sound like, feel like. I don't know, and I don't go looking for them either. So the short answer to the question is no. Now, are there things going on around me? Probably yes. But I don't reach back. It may be reaching for me, but I don't reach back. And there's a reason for that. I've been at this thing now for 13 years. I don't know how much longer. I don't know how many sleepovers I have ahead of me. I may have more behind me than ahead of me, but I've got some ahead of me nonetheless. And I got to communicate with the owners of these buildings to grant me access for the reasons I wanna have access. And again, that reason is to bring attention to the fact that the buildings exist, um, using the attention brought to these places to let folks know that should continue to exist, and we should tell the stories of our enslaved ancestors. About 13 years ago when I started the Slave Dwelling Project, I used to get these phone calls from these ghost hunting outfits. These TV shows that were more prominent, more prevalent back 13 or so years ago, and I had to shoo them away because that's not what the project was all about. Now, what their intentions were and what others may want to, other descendants of enslaved people may want to do in these places may differ. There may be those who want to come and commune with the ancestors, through maybe the pouring of libations um, and the honoring of our ancestors. I do not dissuade that. I do not tell folks that they cannot come do that, because if they want to come do that while the slave dwelling project is doing this thing, now I'm okay with that. But if they want to do something such as pour libations, and if there's somebody else in the audience who's not familiar with that or skeptical of that process, then it won't be done. But I've never had to say no to anyone with that intent. But me personally, I don't go seeking, trying to commune with our enslaved ancestors, because that's some heavy stuff.
Yeah. Well, early on when you started um, with your work, you called it the Slave Cabin Project, and you changed the name to the Slave Dwelling Project to acknowledge the fact that our ancestors resided in places not just in cabins on the southern rural landscape, but they also lived in the attics and the basement and urban dwellings in the south and the north. And in the
Yeah,
beginning, as you know, you had a rather strict interpretation of what preservation should look like. But you relaxed your philosophy after someone did something rather radical in the dead of night to push back against your strict push to preserve a structure.
yeah. Lexington, Missouri was where that happened. A homeowner acquired the property, historic property. On this historic property was a slave dwelling. Well, the preservationists, me being one of them, got in her ear and started telling her about the Secretary of Interior standards and the what she should do with her property, and if she was going to preserve the building, you had to do it this way. It has to be pristine. You got to bring it back to what it was like in that period when it was built. Well, she got so frustrated with us and our effort that she, under the cover of darkness, she tore it down. So that made me know very early in the process that these private owners, if they whatever they want to do with their buildings, we need to allow them to do that. And we should only ask for access, and the ability to ask them to tell the stories of the people who were enslaved in those spaces. But one such space that I stayed in was indeed Sylvester Manor in the attic, and I saw the artwork up there, the artwork of a young child who carved a ship into the wall. And I'm sure at some point in the future, of what we're doing here right now, Donnamarie can make that, paint a clearer picture of that than I just did. But yeah, there are those spaces that one would not expect that enslaved people once dwelled. This slavery in the North, although they did have plantations in the North, the slavery there was a lot more intimate. Slavery ended in New York in 1799 on paper, but the last person freed in New York was 1827. In 1703, 40% of New Yorkers were slave owners. And when South Carolina seceded from the Union on December 20th of 1860, for a brief moment, New York considered seceding also because of its financial investment in the institution of slavery. So a lot of these places where enslaved people once dwelled were not separate buildings or outbuildings or dependencies, as they're sometimes labeled. Sometimes these places are saved by default. These homeowners are trying to save this nice, beautiful, architecturally significant space, but at the same time, they're saving the places where our enslaved ancestors once dwelled.
Well, you mentioned, and I've mentioned the fact that our presidents, U.S. presidents, were enslavers. And as you know, Joe, we made a request at least 3 times through various channels to try to spend a night in the White House. And we always try to make an appeal if there's anybody who's listening who might have some influence, who might be able to get us in the White House, because the White House is important because our ancestors built it.
Yeah, we want to make that happen. The White House would be the ultimate. I think we've got a I think we got a longer window now, to try to make that happen. our current president, Joe Biden, his wife is a history teacher, if I'm not mistaken. And I think we should continue our appeal to her, to whoever can make it happen, um, to try to do that. There are other places also. There's a new museum in Washington D.C., the African American Museum. They got a slave cabin there. There's a Decatur house that's also associated with also associated with the White House. That's a possibility. We're going to be getting some material about slave dwellings in the Washington D.C. area. We may uncover something there that might be have some potential. I got a former board member that's from Washington D.C. She's trying to make something happen for us in D.C. In conjunction with George Washington University. So we're going to make something happen there. Just keep in mind that some of the places that we stay, the slave dwellings don't exist anymore. So we'll go pitch a tent, in those places where those slave dwellings used to be, so that we can again honor the enslaved ancestors in that way.
Well, thank you so much, Joe and Herb. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and I know that we could continue it for much, much longer. But I wanted to jump in. We have a few questions in the Q&A. And I'm thankful to her because you actually asked all of the questions on my list.
I'm a mind reader. Did you know that?
So,
yeah, I do that on the weekends.
So we're gonna wing that part a little bit, but but this has been a really fascinating conversation and explanation of how you came to write the book, and just really great. So we have a question from Kara Burton, who says, have any federal sites with slave dwelling structures received federal funding to preserve them? That's an interesting question.
Yeah. Yes. There are national parks that are doing a great job. I've stayed at the Booker T. Washington site in Hardy, Virginia. My first federal National Parks Service site was a magnolia plantation in Louisiana. There are a lot of places named Magnolia, a lot of for some reason. So yeah, there are a lot of federal sites out there that tell the stories of our enslaved ancestors. Also stayed at Kingsley Plantation in near Jacksonville, Florida. Kingsley Plantation, the enslaver there had children, had a relationship with an enslaved woman, Anna Kingsley. They had children together. And when he died, he left the plantation to her, and she continued to operate it as a plantation. Yes, a black slave owner. So yeah, there are a lot of federal places that we've been to. The one that's on the schedule for next year is Fort Moultrie and Fort Sumter here in Charleston, South Carolina. They have the Charles Pinckney site that's also a part of their jurisdiction, or what they also administer. So I've got a National Park Service site on the schedule for 2024.
Okay. What I was going to ask you, because Herb didn't ask you, you said that you probably have more sleepovers behind you than in front of you. Can you speak a little bit about the organization of the Slave Dwelling Project and how that it has expanded from just your sleepovers at different sites to include the annual conferences that you've been holding, as well as what your wish list is for the coming years and where you want your organization to go, as well as what is your wish list for places that you really aspire to, other than the White House. And I think we all need to sort of collectively work on that.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a board. We have a board of directors, board members from, let's see, Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina. Are part of what the Slave Dwelling Project is right now. Oh, and in Louisiana, a board member from Louisiana also. Um, so yeah, what we want to do ultimately, we've only covered 25 states so far. That means 25 more states. We wanna we want to go and hopefully try to find a structure that relates to slavery. We know it all the time won't be a structure. We use an example like Oregon, um, or Washington State. Then we have to think about York on the Lewis and Clark expedition. He went through that space. They
Yeah.
camped somewhere.
Yep.
York was enslaved. York wanted his freedom, thought he would get his freedom after he got back off of that expedition. That did not happen. So we want to certainly cover all the states, and for those of you who may think, oh no, well that you won't find that. Google Google slavery in whatever state, and something's gonna pop up. So we want to follow those leads and put them, in the portfolio. One thing that we want to do next year One
Mhm.
thing that we will do next year is have our eighth conference. Our seven conferences so far have been in southern states. We want our eighth conference to be in a northern state somewhere. So if any of the 39 people on this call could help us make that happen, then let's by all means do so. We For the last 4 years we've been partnering with institutions of higher learning to bring on these conferences. Donna can speak to the fact that she's gone to at least one conference,
Yeah.
and she could speak on her experience there if she chooses. But that's what we want to do next year. We want to work more with sites that are working more with the descendants of those who were enslaved there. I think one good example of that is Montpelier. Yeah, now they went through some stuff maybe a year or so ago, but they're over that now, and they're in a better place now where they show a good example of working with the descendants of those who were enslaved at these sites. I want to, build relationships with a lot more relationship with organizations like that, and I want to take it to another level. I'm hoping that a lot of these sites that charge an entrance fee, I'm
Mm.
hoping that they'll peel off a portion of every ticket sold to put into a reparations fund, not to do a cash payout to anybody, but pay it forward as in a scholarship for a youth who wants to take their education to the next level. I think that every site should do that research to find out the descendants of those who were enslaved there and have this fund apply to their future education.
Great. We have another question that just came in that says from Sarah Cato that says, have you considered Georgetown University in St. Louis University, which was founded by the same order of slaveholders, the Jesuits? I think that's sort of in line also with your ideas about, connecting with institutions of higher learning. You could do a whole sort of slave dwelling project tour of universities, all up and down the East Coast and beyond. So
Yeah.
have you been in touch at all with Georgetown University or?
Years ago, somebody from Georgetown University contacted me about me coming there, and it kind of that conversation died.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think that would be a great thing. I'm communicating now with the National Trust for Historic Preservation about maybe creating some tours
Mhm.
that don't exist within their portfolio right now. I'm going to be drawing on my experience. I'm going to be maybe helping them to create some tours. And what you just mentioned there, Donnamarie, when I talk to my person at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, I'm going to mention those institutions of higher learning that uh, exist because of that institution of slavery. Now, I can't give you a cut of whatever we create, but I'll give you credit for the idea. Um, so yeah. That that might be another thing that I thought about is the Green Book. The
Yeah.
fact that for us to get from point A to point B in that period in our history, that had to be well thought out and planned because not every place accommodated us. Maybe we could do something um, centered around that. The Slave Dwelling Project also is trying to take these conversations to other places. You know, these conversations that we have here, what we discuss. We, as an organization, the Slave Dwelling Project, we're discussing taking the conversation to places other than antebellum sites or places where slavery once existed, because it's so very important now that we have those conversations because of those, this effort to legislate that this history not be taught to our youth. We got to take this conversation to those places that matter, and they're not all antebellum sites.
Absolutely. We only have a few minutes left. Because this is Preservation New York, do you want to talk about your next sleepover that will be in New York?
Yeah, in about 2 weeks, both Herb and I are coming to Brooklyn, to Lefferts. Yeah, right there.
White House. Yes.
Yeah, that's where we're coming to, and we're looking forward to that. Hopefully, some of you on this line, on this one of the 39 of you, some of the 39 of you might be seeing us in about 2 weeks. I don't think there's room for a sleepover. You may want to just call them directly to get the details of what's going to be happening there. And I'm hoping that some of you, we can see some of you. Buy your books, guys. I'm sure some of you already got your books. Bring your books, and we'll sign them for you.
And will you also be selling books? Are you doing like a campfire that the evening of the sleepover, or just
yeah, that is happening. They are working with our book company to acquire the books to be sold. Correct.
Okay. Great. I had a question, and this may seem like a strange question, but because you came to Sylvester Manor in 2015 to do a sleepover, and as I said in the beginning, that was sort of the inspiration for us to further the research into the lives of the enslaved people who lived, worked, and died and are buried at Sylvester Manor. And in the intervening 7 years, I know personally the work that we've done has expanded and exploded, and we know so much more than we did then. I know when you came, we talked a little bit about the connection to Lloyd's Manor, where you did a sleepover the night before you came to Sylvester Manor, and the connection to Jupiter Hammond, and we know so much more about that. Have you ever thought about revisiting a place?
Yeah.
Because the place after your sleepover changed, expanded their narrative, became more inclusive, has embraced sort of the mission that you set them on.
Yeah. There's some places where I didn't stop going. One such place is Holly Springs, Mississippi. For the last 10 years or so, I've been going there. We even managed to still go there, through the COVID scare. Which is still a thing. So some of the places I have tenure, if you will. I've been going there, consecutively. But yeah, there are those places where I have gone, and maybe a few years have passed since I've gone again. So yeah, I do that. Now I can only count them in the portfolio once. And there's some of these places where I go a second time, I don't do the sleepover, because again, I can only count them once. But some,
you can always put an asterisk special. We can put a special symbol. So
yeah.
Just quickly, we have one last question I'm going to ask from the Q&A of does the project have any specific plans or special plans for the 250th anniversary of the 1770
Revolutionary War?
Yes.
Revolution. Yeah. No, but we should. That'd be 2026 if I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I think you kind of gave me another assignment there, Donnamarie.
Yes, I did. But no, and because we're representing New York, we're going to give you two more that also coming up is the 400th anniversary of Dutch New York. as well as 2027, which would be the 20th anniversary of 1827 and the abolition of slavery in New York. So you got a lot of work to do up here.
Okay, well, that sounds like it's well within my retirement projection. So,
Well, Joe, I don't know if you know this or not, but we don't have to look very far because the Powder magazine here in Charleston has a grant, and they're trying to, for the 250th, they're going to do some interpretation on resistance, Black resistance and slavery during the Revolutionary War. So that's, in fact, that's one story that I'm working on right now because they're getting ready to gear up for that because it's
okay,
going to take a lot of time.
and I know the director there well, Catherine Pemberton.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So in
Lovely.
wrapping up, you guys have a lot of work to do. We really appreciate you being with us this afternoon to talk about the book, and the future of the project is very healthy. You're not retiring anytime soon, Joe. You may, as you say, you may not actively be sleeping in your sleeping bag so much, but the work of the Slave Dwelling Project will live on and continue to evolve and mature. And from all of us, I cannot thank you enough for the work that you have done over these 13 years. It has been revolutionary, so important to where we have come from, where we are going, and it is so important for where we are right now today. So to all of our participants who joined us this afternoon, thank you so much for being part of our audience and participating in this conversation with Joe McGill Jr. and Herb Frazier. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Katie, back to you.
Thank you so much, Donnamarie. Thank you, Herb, and thank you, Joe. This was great. This recording will be up soon on our YouTube and on our website. You can also go to our website to find some more information about the Slave Dwelling Project, a link to buy the book, all that good stuff. If you haven't gotten the book yet, I highly recommend it. And look out for where Joe pops up next. As he mentioned, he'll be in Brooklyn next week. And Joe, please do keep us in mind if you come back to New York. We'd love to connect with you and help you connect with others who you're trying to get in touch with. So thank you all so much for your time, for your work, and to everyone in attendance, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you at the next one.